Good afternoon, and welcome to another installment of The Conversation with Al McFarlane's Book Chat Thursday. I am W.D. Foster Graham, and I am the book review editor for Insight News, as well as the co host on The Conversation with Al McFarlane, where we provide the diverse, stimulating, robust, enlightening, and empowering conversation from all avenues of the African and African American diaspora. We are currently at exceeded 1,200 subscribers, and we're definitely shooting for the 2,000 mark. So if you are a viewer and you like our content, please do like, share, and subscribe to our channel for the Conversation with Al McFarlane. Well, I am also proud to say, was the event planner for the Minnesota Black Authors Expo, which had its kickoff event last Saturday at the Minneapolis Central Library. And I can say it was an amazing success between the authors, spoken word. We also had a writer's boot camp, a teen creative workshop, and of course, our children's corner. So this is the kickoff event because there will be 4 events coming up. Our next event will take place on February 8th, 2025 at the Dakota County Library in Apple Valley, April 12th, 2025 at the St. Paul Public Library in downtown St. Paul, and June 21st, 2025 to observe Juneteenth at the 825 Arts Building in the Rondo community of St. Paul. So mark that on your calendar. So if you missed last weekend, there you have 3 more times to sit back, enjoy, and hey, support Black authors and buy their books. Now, our guest today is Ms. Shannon Gibney. She is a writer, educator, and an activist. She's the author of several books, including The Girl I Am, Was, and Never Will Be, a speculative memoir of transracial adoption. This book received a Michael L. Printz Honor and the Minnesota Book Award. See No Color and Dream Country were both winners of Minnesota Book Awards. Where We Come From, which was co-authored, and this was winner of the 2023 Carter G. Woodson Award. Also, Sam and the Incredible African and American Food Fight, a children's picture book about a cross-cultural family. A Bush artist and McKnight writing fellow, Gibney teaches at Minneapolis College, where she was named Educator of the Year in 2023. Congratulations, Shannon. She lives with her 2 children in Minneapolis, and her newest children's book, We Miss You, George Floyd, is being published this month. So it is my great honor to introduce our guest for today, Ms. Shannon Gibney.
Hi, everyone. Hi, WD. Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Oh, it's definitely our pleasure, Shannon. So before we go into what the book's about, tell us something about how you grew up. Who were your role models and mentors?
Yeah, so I grew up in Ann Arbor, Michigan, so still in the Midwest, but a little bit different from Minnesota culturally. I was a child in the 80s and a teenager in the 90s, just to sort of give some additional cultural context. I consider myself very lucky because at that time, people still believed in fully funding public education. And so I was able to go to what was called an open school at that time. My parents put me and I have 2 brothers in those classes, and they were just like very creative, very open. Did not have people sort of kids sitting at desks in rows the whole time, and we had like a publishing area, this is like many years ago now, right? It just fed my imagination. I felt, I love school. I was always I just felt like I was always engaged, it's always interesting, something interesting going on. So I feel like that really provided me with a very solid grounding, both as a writer, and then of course, writers have to also be readers, and so I grew up loving reading. Of course, that was my window into wanting to be a writer. Reading all these books and just being like, well, I want to write my own story.
Hey.
And yeah, and so I just kept along that track. Luckily, I had parents that were very supportive. Never once did they be like, when I was like, well, I think I actually want to major in creative writing in college, and never once were they like, that's a terrible idea. You're never going to get a job. Like, things that I hear other parents saying to their kids when their kids express interest in, majoring in the arts. My parents were like, we know that you'll make it work. We know you're a hard worker. We know you love it. And we're with you. So that made a big difference as well. And then just really, I think being intentional about, the kind of life that I've always wanted to have. And that's a life of meaning. That's a life of art. That's a life of community, a life of curiosity, accountability, learning, all of these things. And so everything that I have done, I'm by no means perfect. Like that is not what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But certainly the way that I conduct myself in the world, what I aspire to, and the work that I've been able to do has come out of all those things. Yeah.
Hey, they're having that support. It makes a huge difference.
It makes a huge difference. It makes a huge difference. It really does. Yeah.
So who were some of the people, in addition to your family, like persons where you in school, in the community, that were definitely like your mentors that you would consider?
Yeah. So, my best friend growing up, we met when we were 6. I moved into the house next to her, and she was so excited because, there's another girl her age there next door. And so, we've been best friends for 43 years now. We're
Yes,
about to
yeah.
turn 50. Yeah. And, those, I think, it's so meaningful to have people in your life over time because she remembers things about me that I don't necessarily even remember. And it sort of, it's like these signposts, right? Okay, when we were 12, this, and okay, and then 21, we argued about this, and then when you were in your 30s, you took this trip, and remember what happened with that, um, and just people, just like you need people also to call you in sometimes. Like, okay, you really should get that foot looked at or whatever, So yeah, definitely shout out to Bobby Chase Wilding. And she's now a organizer and activist and runs a small public health nonprofit in upstate New York called Clean and Healthy New York. So very proud of her. And, so many of my girlfriends, I think, we just sort of raised each other coming up. And that's always been very meaningful and important to me. It continues to be as I age. And those writers that I encountered through reading at a young age, so Nikki Giovanni,
Yes.
and certainly James Baldwin, who's just a huge source of support and inspiration for me throughout my entire life. Really, read him first when I think I was 15. I read Another Country, and then it was just like, I have to read everything this man ever wrote.
Yes,
like, give it all to me. Those people that you read that you feel like are speaking directly to you. That's how I felt with him. Toni Morrison, of course. And Amy Césaire, there's so many folks, Percival Everett. I'm reading his book, James, right now, which of course is the retelling of Huck Finn from Jim's point of view. And this is so, it's so freeing to see the kinds of moves that he's making, right? And kind of like what is possible in a novel. And just to know that, just by the act of writing whatever I'm writing, I'm part of this long and, impressive, very impressive Black literary and intellectual tradition. I wish that all Black children and all children were exposed to that at a young age and immersed in it, because I think some of our educational outcomes would be really different if that were the case. Yeah, if we knew that this is our birthright, this is ours, this is where we come from. Yeah,
that's true, because I think it's important about remembering the shoulders on which we stand on.
Exactly.
that brought us here. Oh, and speaking of shout outs, I just meant to remember to give shout out to Dorothy Nins, who is the executive director of the Minnesota Black Authors Expo. Thank you, Dorothy, for your vision, and also to Devonna Pittman, the founder of the Minnesota Black Authors Expo. And shout out to Michelle, one of our regular viewers. Hey, Michelle. good to see you on the channel. Now, coming to your book, tell us about it, your latest book.
Yeah, so just a couple days ago, 2 days ago, right? That would be a couple days. On November 12th, University of Minnesota Press released my third children's picture book called We Miss You, George Floyd. And this is a book inspired by my daughter. And it's about this little Black girl who is living in the neighborhood next to the neighborhood where George Floyd was killed. So about 13 blocks from George Floyd Square. She goes to school, kitty corner from there. And, she's hearing all this stuff in her family, in her school, in her neighborhood about George Floyd, this man that the Minneapolis Police Department has killed. And, she's trying to make sense of it. And, the uprisings start, the marches, all this stuff. And she finally bikes down to George Floyd Square with her parents and brother. And she sees the community there. She sees the art there. She herself is a visual artist. She's always making art. And so she, at the end, figures out that she has something to actually contribute, something important to this movement to honor George Floyd and his life, and to fight for justice for Black people. Yeah. And I was so lucky to have Leah Rose Jackson, who is a young and very gifted visual artist in Minneapolis, who illustrated the work. And she actually, met my daughter and I at George Floyd Square. And we walked around, and then I invited her back to my house. And of course, anybody who comes into the house, my daughter has to show them all her artwork.
Yes,
all her, her markers, her crayons, her paper, her special, like all the things, and how she's organized them. She's a little organizer. And so Leah was very gracious and very open to that. And so that she then made the little girl in the book this artist, there's this art everywhere, and just based it on Maui, my daughter, which was just incredibly moving for me, of course. So yeah, shout out to Leah Rose Jackson. She's wonderful. Yeah.
Indeed. Shout out. Hat tip. Yeah. One thing I think I talked about, before we were on the air, was the fact I know my own connection with that area, because George Floyd Square at 38th Street and Chicago Avenue in Minneapolis, the Cub Food Store where he was murdered outside of used to be a pharmacy. And when I was a teenager back in the 1960s, I worked there as a cashier.
Wow.
So finding out that where it was word chilling.
Yes.
For me. So, and as for that day, May 25th, 2020, for the community, I have no doubt that all of us could say where they were and what they were doing on that day.
Mm-hmm.
Could you share that with us?
I mean, I feel like, there was that day, and then there was the video, and so for me, it just was this slow outpouring. I still haven't seen the video. I will never watch the video. A child at one of my school visits for this book actually asked me if I'd seen the video and what did I think. And I was like, yeah, I will never watch the video. I was like, the video will give me PTSD. I was like, those videos, the people who need to watch them are the people who don't believe that this stuff happens. I was like, I'm Black, and so I know all too well that this stuff happens. But I just remember the endless circulation of his barbaric death, like I just remember that from that time. So, and, we had Philando Castile before that. And then, before that we had Jamar Clark and, so many others in our communities, but definitely this one was the closest, physically and I think emotionally as well for me and my family and my friends. I live in Powderhorn, and this happened at the edge of Bancroft and Powderhorn. And and then it just started to feel like things were spiraling with the uprisings, which was like, the uprisings were like at the same time, like, it was amazing to see. I mean, these were the largest international, like these were the largest protests in the world. Like these were like that it was, and they went on and on, and then at the same time as the pandemic, and it's just so many, and then the counter sort of response to the pandemic, the counter response to the protests, where we had white nationalists for a while infiltrating our neighborhoods and doing all kinds of violent things. It felt wild for a while to be here. And people were like, oh yeah, and then the governor called in the National Guard and everything was great. And it's like, no, everything was not great. Those of us who lived in those neighborhoods and had tanks being rolling down our streets, and just heard from people who called the police, and the police like didn't help, and like their house, one neighbor's house was on fire, and like they called the fire department, and the fire department didn't help at all. It was their neighbors that helped put out. I mean, it felt like everything was sort of coming apart at the seams in a way for a little while. Yeah.
Yes, that is so true and stuff. As I know, for me, being in the pandemic, I can remember I usually don't watch TV and stuff, so I remember I was sitting there. Actually, I was working on my next book.
Oh, wow.
Writing and stuff. My son had to call and tell me because he lived right just off Lake Street in Chicago.
Oh, wow.
And so when I sort of say, hey, wait a minute, that was a lot to take in.
Yep.
At that time and stuff, because he lived that close to what was going on. So all he could do was just sit back and pray, hey, please, you're gonna be okay. But no, but yeah, I mean, this event just went around the world.
Yeah.
That being said,
Yeah.
what work do you hope that this book does in communities?
So I think the thing about trauma in humans is that, we compartmentalize it, when something is really traumatic, it's like it floods the system, and of course that's overwhelming. We're also a grief averse culture. We don't have a lot of just tools available for people to process these things. And understanding that, grief is part of life, and so, yeah, we need to integrate these tools into our daily living, and that's mostly not really happening still. And for this event, this tragedy, I mean, people are still very much processing it, and children, we have this idea that somehow things affect children less because, they're younger than us, or, they don't have the language really to process it, but that's not true. That's not true at all. It's still in your body, whether or not you can articulate that. And so, what I hope with the book is that it becomes a starting point, a kind of context for caregivers, for teachers, for kids themselves, to start talking about this stuff. Certainly, George Floyd's murder and the aftermath, but also just the issue of police in America, right? And the history of the police, how the police came to be, what the police's relationship has been with Black people and BIPOC folks and those from historically marginalized communities. And that work, I can already see it starting to happen. I was lucky enough to share the book with my daughter's third grade class last year at Bancroft Elementary. And, those kids, just like her, were in first grade when this happened. And they remember. I mean, they had a lot of stuff to say. I did not have to pull things out of them. One little girl, her mom had a shop that, had been vandalized, during the riots. Other kids remembered, doing neighborhood watch, with their parents during when the white nationalists were coming through our neighborhoods. Other kids remembered going to the marches with their family. There were just like all kinds of things. There were all kinds of things that came up, and I know that we're going to read the book in a minute here, but there's one line in the book, and it's we can imagine a world without police violence because we can imagine a world without police. And that line, it's so interesting. The few kids I've read the book to so far are like, huh. They're like, and one kid at the school visit was like, well, we have to have police. like it was like, what are you talking about? A world without police? Like, that's not possible. Like, then we'd have all this crime. And this other kid was like, would we? And I was like, and he's like, well, what if we took all that money and put it into housing and put it into our food and put it into our streets and and I was like, that's a really interesting question, and it's not just Black kids and kids of color that are processing this. I mean, I have good friends who live off of George Floyd Square, and there's some violence around there, following, maybe like the summer after the George Floyd was murdered. And carjackings and all this stuff. And they're white, and they have their son was 5 when this happened, and he could not go to sleep. They told me, like, he would, like, when it was bedtime, like, eventually he would get so exhausted that he would fall asleep, but he couldn't do the bedtime routine because he was so upset that something like this could happen so close to his house, that one human being would do this to another human being. And the only thing that calmed him down and eventually allowed him to go to sleep was this metta loving kindness meditation. It's a Buddhist meditation. It's like, may all beings be safe and protected. May all beings be free of harm. May all beings be free. May all beings be at peace. It's like that, like over and over and over again. They just did that to him, with him, until he fell asleep. But it's just like, these are the things where it's just like, at some point we have to talk about this, right? Like at some point, and we need to do it in a way that's developmentally appropriate, you know? And so what does that look like? You know, this book is kind of my first stab at that.
Yeah. I see, most definitely. And that ties into probably my next question on that, probably because I know in my generation, especially if you were a Black parent, sooner or later you'd have to have your kids have the talk. We'd have to have the talk. White parents didn't have to do that, but Black parents would have to have the talk when it came to police and systemic racism. So kind of share your take on that.
I mean, yeah, like, right. Like, this is, it's just something that's unavoidable if you're a Black parent of Black children. I mean, it's just like, a parent's number one job is to keep their kids safe. Yes. To the best of their ability. You know, I mean, I tell my son will be 15 in February. And I tell him all the time, like, my job is not to be your friend. My job is to protect you. Yes. And I'm going to do that until my last breath leaves my body. Like, that's my job, you know? And because, you know, he is a Black boy in a country that hates Black people. You know, that proven itself historically to hate Black men, and to fear them without cause, particularly in public spaces, particularly if they're with other Black male bodies. You know, and so what does that look like? You know, he's going to start driving soon. He's going to start taking driving lessons, which is a double-edged sword. But, yes. You know, then I'm really going to have, you know, an even more serious talk than we've had about, if you get pulled over, this is what you need to do, right? No sudden movement, the whole thing, right? The Black parents say. And I think the thing, you know, it just as a Black parent, you just resent. You resent the whole thing, right? Like, right. These are children, but it's like you resent how early. I especially resented how early I have to have these. I have to have this talk with a 6-year-old boy, right? Who just wanted to go outside and, you know, play whatever, like water guns and, you know, I don't know, run around with his friends, you know. And my parents got him this really cool, like, Ranger kit, like junior Ranger kit from one of their trips, and it had this little like plastic knife in it, you know. And he's like, he, you know, loved to go around and, you know, play with that, you know, out and about in the neighborhood with his friends. And, you know, I had to be like, no, like, you can do that in the house, you can do that in our backyard, but you can't do that in the neighborhood. And he was like, why? I'm like, because it's not safe for you. He's like, well, it's plastic. I'm like, I know it's plastic. That's not what I mean. And, you know, and he's like, well, you know, so-and-so, you know, their mom lets them have like a plastic gun and a plastic knife. And I was like, yep. And they're not Black, you know? and he's just like, looking at me like, but that don't make no sense. And I'm like, absolutely right. It makes no sense, and it's still the way it is. Racism makes no sense. Sexism makes no sense. Homophobia makes no sense. Nationalism makes no, and yet here we are, right? And so
Right.
I have to be the one to, set down these parameters of engagement, and then I still remember driving around with him when he was like 12 and I had NPR on or something, and he heard the Tamir Rice. I think it was, the guy who shot him was on trial and they were covering it. And he goes, "Oh, okay. Now I get it." And I'm like, these are children. These are children, even though our culture adultifies them. They're children. And so it's just, it is a tragedy, and it's not right that these are the conversations that we have to have with them when they're with children. Yeah.
Especially at so early an age.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So now that being said, and as we mentioned earlier, I'd love to have you share We Miss You, George Floyd.
Yeah, I'd love to share this with all of you. So I'm going to read from the book, and I believe, yes, here it is, the beautiful cover again from Leah Rose Jackson. I've got a ton of events happening locally if you're tuning in from the Twin Cities that we'll share at the end. So, yeah, I just really hope to see you at some of them. If you're elsewhere or also just here and you can't make stuff, this book is available anywhere books are sold. So, of course, encourage folks to first buy from their local independent bookstores because they do so much for our communities. But you should be able to get it anywhere books are sold. So this is We Miss You, George Floyd. We heard about a man who was murdered by police. Everyone was talking about it. On the news, on the radio, even in the streets. He was a man who looked like us and talked like us. He was trying to buy something in a store right by our school. An employee of the store called 911 because they thought he was using a fake $20 bill. Then the police came. They pinned him down. They didn't listen, even when he said, "I can't breathe." Even when he called for his mama. That was the longest, cruelest 8 minutes and 46 seconds. His name was George Floyd. He was a father, a brother, a son, a hip-hop artist, a football and basketball player, and a friend. He was also my neighbor. He worked at a Latin restaurant and dance club before he lost his job because of the coronavirus pandemic. He used to make everyone there laugh when he showed off his bad dance moves. Thousands of people from Minneapolis. Oh, sorry, this moved. Why did it do that? Sorry. Thousands of people from Minneapolis and around the country made a memorial at the place where George Floyd lost his life. It is about 13 blocks from our house. One day, we biked over and we saw all the art and messages that people had left for him. I made my own art to remember George Floyd. I will keep on making art to remember him and all the other Black people who were killed by police in my town. We will keep fighting for justice. We will not forget. This is an old fight, and it will not be won easily. We know you are with us when we march, protest, vote, organize, and tell our stories. And we can imagine a world without police, a world without police violence. What would it feel like, sound like, look like? We miss you, George Floyd. And that's it. Thank you so much for listening.
And thank you for sharing. I mean, that is powerful. That is just so powerful.
Thank you.
So now, after hearing that, in what ways can we as the adults ensure that we never forget?
I mean, we have to, keep telling the stories, and find different ways to do that. I was also at a book launch last night for a book for adults called Art and Artifact. It's it's produced in tandem with an exhibit at the Catherine E. Nash Gallery at the University of Minnesota, and it's a collection of some of the murals that went up, during the protests following George Floyd's murder all around Minneapolis, and of course, I believe her name is Lisa Jones, who's the head of Memorialize the Movement. She was one of the main people who put the book together. And along with, I think her name is Amira McClendon. That's documenting our stories, right? Like,
yes,
that's sharing our culture. That is, these are all ways that we can, lean into not just what's been done to us, but what we have made from that, so that even though these horrible things have happened, to us as a community, I always say that our tradition, which I think is, for me, the most powerful thing about being Black, is, our tradition is resistance. Black people have always resisted in this country, always. And so just to know, as a Black woman in 2024, facing the next 4 years of a very repressive, certainly federal government, just gives me such strength to know that this is the lineage that I come from, right? And I think this little girl at the end of the book also, starts to see that, okay, yeah, this is about this incident that just happened, but this has been going on for a long time, and people have been fighting. People who look like me have been fighting for a long time. And there's a kind of strength in that. It starts to become clear to her the kind of life that she might want and have, which is a life of artistic resistance. Yeah.
Indeed. That being said, how would you characterize the situation of Black writers today?
Yeah. So, I think like the really positive thing is like I just feel like there's so much good Black writing happening right now. Across genre. I write in all kinds of different spaces. So I certainly obviously write in kid lit. And there's some, fantastic children's picture books coming out, and middle grade novels and YA novels. And then of course in the adult area, right? Adult literary fiction. And and for me, I'm really interested in sort of like the genre hopping, right? People who are writing like straight literary fiction, but it's like it's got zombies in it or something, or like like the Chain Gang, like like there's this Coliseum, and then the Black people are doing, like so. I just think that there's like kind of something for everyone if you know where to look.
Right.
The problem is like I know a lot of people who really actually do enjoy reading, but they just don't know. Like it's like they walk into a bookstore and it's like they're like a deer in headlights. Like they don't know where to look. They don't know what to get. So I do think that curation is an art form. And I, as a writer, I'm constantly sort of talking about books and recommending books to people because I know that it's helpful to them, and a lot of it is like finding the right book for the right reader. And so, I think that that's like a really exciting, I just think it's like really exciting, to be in that kind of milieu right now and to be in that kind of cultural moment that we've been in for a little while now. As far as Black writers are concerned, I think in the dominant cultural moment, it's definitely a downer. Like, I don't think there's any way of like characterizing it otherwise, where we have, this rise in book banning, and an incredible, like meteoric rise in it. And then this new administration, federal administration, like, they've shown themselves to be, a group of people who believe that is a worthy pursuit, banning books. And, to me, if you look, of course, at the books that are banned, the two categories of people whose books are most banned are people who are Black and people who are queer. And God forbid if you're a queer Black writer, because you're going to be on one of those lists probably. Your work is going to be on one of those lists. And so it's this thing of, we're in this moment where the dominant culture, it's a backlash, basically. Like they don't want to hear those stories. They don't want their children to hear those stories. They don't want to have to actually deal with the real history of this country, And so, I just feel like, like there's that great quote from Baldwin where he's like, the job of the Negro writers, paraphrasing, is, the job of the Negro writer is to tell the truth about how we got, like the truth of this country, about how we got to where we are now. And he's like, we must tell the truth until we can no longer bear it. And as the song goes, the truth hurts. Especially the truth about Black people and folks from historically marginalized communities in this country. So it takes a certain kind of fortitude, I think, to do the work in this time. And, most writers I know, it's like we don't necessarily feel that we have a choice to do the work. The work is just constantly moving through us. And in this circle or cycle, I guess is the best word, from community through us,
Yes.
to community back through us, over and over again, And to me, it's actually a sacred process, And so that's where it's like, okay, you really have to be in it for that reason, because it's not easy. It's not easy work. Just to write well is not easy. And then publishing, it has never been easy. And then the political environment is really not great right now. So, but I just feel like Black people know this. We know all of this stuff, right? Like, so you have to do the work for its own reward, is kind of what I'm saying. And I think that there's a lot of Black writers who know that. I think most Black writers I know that, they know that. Yeah.
There you go. There you go. So as one writer to another, who are some of your favorite authors?
Oh, I mean, I already named.
Yeah, you named some of them.
Yeah, I mean, I'm teaching. I guess those are Black writers. I'm teaching in like specifically, but I teach at Minneapolis College. I've been here for about 15 years now, and I'm teaching Louise Erdrich's The Roundhouse. We just finished that with my Composition 1 students, and I just love the work that does in my classes. Is and that, of course, if people haven't read it, it's about sexual violence against Indigenous women, and I mean, it's like all great literature about a great many things, but that's kind of like the inciting incident, I guess, as they would say. And yeah, so she's a national treasure, obviously. And Birch Bark Books here in Minneapolis, if you haven't been there, that's the bookstore that she owns and helps run. And and then, of course, a lot of my friends here, like my friend Kyle Kalia Yang, who's a wonderful Hmong American writer, and she and I have collaborated on some things. She has a new memoir about her mother's life, growing up in Laos and then being a teenager during the war there, making her way as a refugee here to the United States. That book is called Where Rivers Part, and that just came out this year. It's a very beautiful book. I was also with my Comp 1 class. The last book that we read every at the end of the semester is Matt Johnson's graphic novel Incognito, and he's writers who are funny, like satirical writers. Like, I have such respect for them. Like, it just is like, I mean, because that book isn't particularly funny, but his other stuff, his like straight literary fiction, his novels are like laugh out loud funny. I mean, just yeah. So yeah, he's another one. So many people. I just finished oh my gosh, I'm looking at the cover in my mind. She's a poet based out in LA. Oh my God, I cannot think of her name. Tracy K. Smith, the beautiful, Black American poet as well, whose work is just stunning. There's so many people. There's so many people. Jason Reynolds, who is a writer of children's literature. And, you know, he's, I think, got a new book out now about this Black boy's first sexual experience. And it's gotten amazing reviews. So I can't wait to read that either. Anytime that I use his work in my classes with children, or my workshops with children, they love it so much. So, yeah.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Now, about your upcoming events, Shannon.
Yes, I have somebody called it my gauntlet of events, you know. So I am very fortunate. I have a lot of community events. So I'm going to be at Midtown Global Market in my neighborhood on Saturday, this coming Saturday, the 16th, from about 10 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. And it's their first authors and illustrators event. So there's a bunch of people. It's like 20 people, and we'll have tables. We'll have our work out there, and you can check it out. You can buy stuff. You can sign it for you. All those things. And also the afternoon of the 16th. So this Saturday, I'm going to be at Hosmer Library. And very thankful and happy that I have great support from Hennepin County Libraries. And so they're going to give away 25 copies of the book. And then folks can also purchase the books there if they want. And then there's going to be an art activity too. We have an art activity that goes with it, Q&A. And I'm going to be doing an abolitionist story time event at Modus Locus Expansion with Janata Petrus. We are both going to read our children's picture books. Her book, of course, is called Can We Please Give the Police Departments to the Grandmothers? And that's based on a poem by the same name that she wrote and has shared in so many community spaces. And so we're going to read, and then we're going to talk about these issues of, like, you know, abolition and children's literature, et cetera. And so that'll be great. That's on the 21st of this month. I have another event here at Minneapolis College where I teach on the 26th. Our sponsors are going to give away 50 copies of the book. And it'll be like light refreshments, discussion. And then in December, I have an event at Subtext Books in St. Paul. And then in January, I have an event at Wild Rumpus Books Storytime. And then we have I believe we have a JPEG image that we can show for viewers and listeners of the events.
Well, definitely, you heard it here. Okay, so if you didn't catch Shannon here on the show, you know where you can find her.
That's right.
And check out her work, check out her books. Because say, hey, she's an amazing author. And
thank you.
With our last few minutes here, I have a question that I have asked for all of my authors.
Okay.
On this show, it says, what advice would you give to your 13-year-old self from here?
I would say hang in there. You know, I hated 13. I'm not gonna lie. You know, a lot of people don't like middle school years because kids they tend to be the most insecure and therefore the meanest.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and if you're from a group that, you know, like an in-between group, which I was, you know, I was mixed Black and in a time where it was not really okay to be mixed Black. And so it was a lot of teasing and bullying and stuff. And I just hated school and whatever. And thankfully after that, I went to a high school that was, like, you know, full of weird nerds and, you know, just artists and weird people. And these are my people. I'm fine, you know, after that. But, you know, just to tell myself, like, just hang in there. It's going to get better.
There you go.
Yeah.
And now for our viewers today, where can we purchase your books?
Every place that books are sold. So again, we're very lucky if you're tuning in Minnesota. We live in this amazing place where there's tons of independent bookstores. And so my neighborhood bookstore that I always go to is Moon Palace Books in South Minneapolis. There's Black Garnet Books in St. Paul. That's Black owned, Black run. There's Majors and Quinn, over on Hennepin. Wild Rumpus. That's a kidlit book, and it's really fun. If you've never been in there, they've got it looks like a little Hobbit place when you open the door, and then you walk in and it goes way back, and it's just like this fantastical land that you feel like you've walked into. And just so many other places that I would urge you to visit and support instead of just ordering on Amazon. But if you have to order on Amazon, you have to. But I'm just saying, if you can find a way to not do that, it'd be good. Yeah.
Okay. Well, so it's good to know because it's different when you're at an actual bookstore and you can interact and stuff.
That too, right, with real humans, not just algorithm. Maybe you like this algorithm. You like that. Maybe you'd like this.
Or things like that. Okay, and say for our viewers, if you can pull up the event list there. Yeah, there we go. Thank you.
And I also just want to tell people, if you're looking for me or my events, just go to my webpage, and that's just shannongibney.com.
Wonderful. Well, I am definitely appreciative of all you have brought to our show and sharing about this event. George Floyd's murder is something that I know I will, and so many people will never forget. And we just and we take up that mantle, that we make sure that we teach this, and especially because, again, there can never be enough Black children's books out there, and there can never be enough of the diverse qualities of each book. Because as I've said so often when on the show, when I was growing up, I was wondering, where are the books that have characters who look like me?
Right.
And I am so grateful that we have so many now, so that as parents, or even if you don't have kids of your own, but you have a close relationship with a child, to fill up your personal library, because this is our documentation. This is part of our history that will go on long after we're gone.
Yes, exactly. Okay. Exactly.
So again, Shannon, once again, thank you for being on Conversation with Al McFarlane.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Okay. This is W.D. Foster Graham, your host today for Book Chat Thursday on the Conversation with Al McFarlane. And again, see you in the next go round.